Hello, welcome to DTA. We're here with Alex from DTA, who's going to explain to us the MED ignition management kit for your A series. So, Alex, do you want to talk through what we've got here?
Yeah, indeed. Obviously, the key part is the ECU. This is an S40 ignition only ECU, so it only controls the spark. It doesn't do anything on the fuel side. For the ECU to know what it needs to do, we have a crank position sensor, which will run off a crank trigger wheel, which is mounted to the engine. And obviously, you have a coil pack to actually fire the spark plugs. This is all connected together with our ignition only wiring loom. And then you do have a couple of options as well. You've got a manifold pressure sensor and a throttle position sensor. These can be used to turn a 2D ignition map into a 3D ignition map if you want to.
So going back slightly on these trigger wheel pulleys here, on the kits we actually remove one of the teeth for you, so that's in the right position. So it comes fully balanced with the tooth removed, so you don't have to touch that. So the coil pack, is that just a generic coil pack then? Or?
Yeah, we can use any typical wasted spark coil pack. So if you've got a Valio, or if you happen to have something else lying around like a Ford or whatever, it makes no difference to us. As long as it's a good quality coil pack, you'll be fine. I
suppose the big question is, why would you choose to invest in that as opposed to running a distributor, which has worked for donkey's years?
Sure. The main advantage of a coil pack is you're not limited to where the ignition can occur. So obviously with a distributor, you've got your contact points, and that limits the amount of advance and retard you can have. With a coil pack, you can put it anywhere. Now obviously the slight downside to that is if you put it in the wrong place, it's not going to run very well, but you know, that'll be sorted out in the mapping, and the base map that comes on the ECU is very accurate to start with anyway.
Okay, so you can adjust the ignition mapping at any point in the RPM range?
Correct. Any point in the RPM range if you're just using the crank trigger. If you use throttle position sensor or a manifold pressure sensor, you can actually have a full 3D map. So as the RPM goes up and you increase your throttle or your manifold pressure changes, you can obviously manage that and do a very, very fine tuning if you want to.
Got it. Okay. Well, the kit comes without these sensors.
Correct.
So it will run without those?
Correct, yes. As I say, you've then just got a 2D map, so the only thing we've got any idea of is the RPM. So as the RPM goes up, you can alter the ignition based on that only.
So like an intelligent distributor?
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. And what are these sensors then? So one's a throttle position, one's a map?
Yeah, so that's a throttle position sensor, which obviously monitors the position of the throttle and how far the butterflies are open. Based on that, the pressure in the manifold will change. So this is a manifold absolute pressure sensor, so it measures it as an absolute pressure,
okay.
not against barometric pressure. So we know exactly what the pressure is at all times, and either of these will work fine. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, and some people actually use both of them together.
Right, okay. I've heard that these are more popular, the map sensor with the turbo installation.
Correct. Obviously with a turbo you've got increased boost, increased manifold pressure. The more pressure you have, obviously the more fuel you need, and generally, depending on the engine, you'll need a bit less timing so that it doesn't all go bang in a quite spectacular way.
And this wiring loom, see, it's a completely professionally made loom. Do you make this in-house?
We do. They're made from Raychem 44 spec wiring with Kynar heat shrink, which is flame retardant, so if anything does go wrong, the loom's got at least a reasonable chance of surviving. And obviously we've been doing them for many, many years, and they are very reliable.
I know you said to me before, one of the worst parts of converting to ignition management is when somebody wires it up themselves.
Correct.
That's where the problems occur.
Generally, yes. I mean, if they know what they're doing, it's fine. But one of our biggest issues is wiring, because if you get any noise in the system, the signals get all messed up and the ECU just doesn't know where anything is and it has to shut itself down.
Okay, so if that's a bit long, do you think best just to coil it up rather than chop it down?
Definitely.
Okay,
definitely.
Got it. I mean, we have measured this, so it should fit with a race mini with the coil pack up on the bulkhead, and everything else should fit. So if you've got a mini, that should be okay. If you have another A series car, let us know, and DTA can make a loom for you, or one with open ends, I suppose.
That's right.
So do you want to talk us through the software?
Indeed. Let's move over to the PC. Right, so here we've got the DTA software, which will connect to the ECU. The main thing to change between a wasted spark coil pack and a distributor is just to tell the ECU what it's doing. So down here we have a simple option which goes distributor fitted, and if you tick that, save it to the ECU will now run it as a distributor. All the other settings that are in the ECU that come with the kit are already set up to run with your A series minis, so it's simply a matter of fitting everything, firing it up, and away you go.
Okay. Can you talk us through what you need to edit on there if you're mapping?
Yeah, of course. So the main thing for an ignition only ECU is obviously the ignition map. So let's move those out the way. And what you can see is you've got full 3D control over the entire ignition curve. We'll turn that around. So you can see in this case, as the RPM goes up that way, the ignition will change. Now this is a full 3D map, so it would require a TPS as well, or a manifold pressure sensor.
Okay.
If it was without one of those, it would look slightly different, but this is a full 3D map, changing everything across the entire RPM and throttle range.
So this is the kind of maximum potential of the ignition ECU.
Correct. This is how to get absolutely everything, last little bit out of your engine.
Got it. It looks kind of complicated. So is this something you can do at home, or is it best to take it to a rolling road to have this?
Oh,
mapped?
we would definitely recommend doing it on a rolling road. If you get the ignition wrong, you can obviously introduce things like knock events, which will melt pistons very quickly. And also, if your fueling's not quite right, you can get the same issue. So we would definitely recommend getting it done initially on a rolling road, although the map that comes with the ECU is safe to start with. But if you want to try and extract the final little bit, definitely get it onto a rolling road. Once that's done, it's up to you what you want to do.
Do you think most rolling road centres would be able to use this software?
Yes, I mean, we've got a network of dealers all over the world. In the UK, we've got about 60 or 70 different dealers who are recognised on DTA, and there are also others as well that map our software very, very well.
So it's quite nice and generic, I suppose, that they could use it.
Correct.
Does it interpolate?
It does, indeed. So if you look here, for example, you're going from throttle position 29 to 37. So if you're at 33, the ECU will calculate in between the surrounding columns and rows exactly what the exact timing should be.
I've seen it a few times where somebody's had to play around with the map themselves. It doesn't look anywhere near as smooth as that on the diagram on the right.
No, correct. So we can do that as well. So if you opened up something like, let's grab my old test map from my old turbo car. So obviously turbo cars are a lot more sensitive to timing, but what you can tend to find is that they will, that's the fuel, what you tend to find is that the ignition can be very, very different. So you can see it's a lot, this was a base map, so it was a lot more spiky and a lot more over the place.
Okay.
And while that doesn't look ideal, it was perfectly acceptable to start with, and the car ran very well. In fact, it made about 350 brake horsepower with that map.
So a bit more than most minis,
Yeah.
or most A-series cars are going to do.
Indeed.
Does the kit come with a rev limiter?
Yep, so we've got a number of options with rev limiters. By default, there is a hard limit and a soft limit. So you've got your ultimate RPM limit, but what you'll see here is this is where your soft limit would normally be, which in my case was 7,200 with a hard limit of 7,300. So what happens is when you reach the soft limit, you start getting a rolling cylinder cut. So in this case, it'll cut the ignition on every other cylinder until it reaches the hard limit, at which point it just switches off until the RPM drops down again. But what we've got is called spark and fuel cut patterns. So you can actually control where the cylinders are cut. So you can say at this RPM, I just want every one cylinder cut every RPM, every revolution, or as it increases, 2 cuts, 3 cuts, and different patterns. So it's far more control, a lot easier on the engine, and you don't get the massive bangs that you normally get with a hard limiter. Because it builds up so gradually, it very rarely ever gets to the hard limit.
It's a bit safer then.
A lot safer, a lot easier on the engine, and very, very good for it.
I think maybe on the road cars it's not so important, but when you're wearing a crash helmet and someone's coming up behind you, you know, you're quite likely to go off the scale, I suppose.
Yep, very much. So it's one of those when the bit of the red mist hits, it instead of going straight into the hard limit and upsetting the engine, which can obviously upset the balance of the car, this is a lot smoother, you get a lot more notice, and as I say, it's a lot friendlier on the engine.
So the software, you can download it from the DTA website. I've also put up some links on the MED website, so
Yep.
you can download it straight from there.
Correct. So this is the latest version of the software that's just about to be released. This one's not available on the website at the moment, but will be very shortly. But all our software is free. The latest version's always on the website, so you're welcome to help yourself.
And is it Windows only?
Windows only, yes.
Okay. Seems to be the way.
Very
with
much so, yeah.
Mapping.
Very definitely.
But then, you know, most rolling road centres will probably have the Windows laptop there ready to go.
Correct, yep.
If not, probably not worth probably not the place to take your car to.
Indeed, yep.
Got it.
All of our ECUs come with launch control, and all of them come with flat shift as well for the racing cars. So if you come into the into the software here, you can set up your launch control. So there are a couple of different options here. We can just hold the RPM on the start line and then the ECU does nothing else. We can, if you want to connect wheel speed sensors, we can actually do proper full launch control, monitoring the slip on the wheels and keeping that at its optimum. Or if you're not allowed wheel speed sensors, we can also do what's called a launch by elapsed time, where when you let the button go, the ECU will ramp the RPM up to the rev limiter over a set period of time. As I say, that's available on all our ECUs. The next option for the race cars, if you're running a sequential gearbox, we also have full closed loop flat shift. Again, we have a couple of options here. So we can do flat shift with just a simple switch, so the ECU will know that the gear is happening when the switch is closed. And also we have closed loop flat shift, which is for people with sequential gearboxes. We monitor the position of the gearbox in the ECU, so we can see when a shift starts. We'll cut the engine's ignition until the shift is finished, and then bring it back in over a period of time to enable the gearbox to mechanically settle properly without damaging it.
So it could be quite handy if you buy this for your A series Mini, and then later on change to a different engine.
Yep, definitely.
You could probably still use the ECU, so it's got a decent lifetime on that.
Definitely, yep. They're widely used in all sorts of cars. A lot of the race cars use them a lot because we have these sort of functionality available.
What's the oldest ECU you've seen back?
We actually saw one the other day that was originally shipped in 1997 and is still going strong to this day.
There you go.